their website today. So instead, our goal today is to remind everyone who's here with us this morning and everyone who will be watching the recording later what the problem is that we're trying to solve. And that problem is that we have not enough place for people to live. We have an actual housing crisis, and we need to talk about that. So I am going to briefly share a couple of slides. I'm having, there we go. And briefly just kind of frame this in just 4 quick slides for you. So housing isn't just a conversation that's happening in Needham right now. It's a conversation that's happening, well, we heard it in the national election. We've heard it all over the place. Housing is in the public conversation like never before, but particularly an issue in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is the 3rd most expensive state in the US to rent a home. Home prices are dropping in some places in the nation, but not in Greater Boston. And finally, in order for business and top industries to thrive in Massachusetts, in order for us to be competitive, more housing is necessary. So how did we get there? Why is it a problem? Why are we talking about it now? And that is because we've had a decades-long problem with housing production. And this slide explains it really well, I believe. This slide shows you that when we used to build quite a few new homes, every decade in Massachusetts, it's dropped off considerably. And that is the problem. We just don't simply have enough places for people to live in our communities. And this really is very simply what it is. And of course, by having not enough housing, the prices have gone up. Only 1 in 12 residents in the Boston metro area have the annual income needed to buy a typical home. And meanwhile, it also means that it's contributed to a lot of our traffic problem. People are moving further and further away from the city, and that's created more gridlock, more traffic. So in 2022, Boston area drivers spent 134 hours stuck in traffic. And then finally, it's created a housing shortage. And this is the stat that keeps me up at night, okay? The Retailers Association survey in Massachusetts found that 70% of small businesses plan to sell or retire in the next decade. The problem with that is if they're going to plan to sell or retire, who's going to replace them? So keep that one number in mind for later in our discussion. I'm sure we'll come back to it. Meanwhile, who's leaving and what is the challenge or what is the result of our housing shortage? Well, 1 in 4 people in Greater Boston plan to leave Greater Boston in the next 5 years. And when they asked them why, it's because the cost of rent, job availability, the ability to find a home were top reasons why. And another survey showed in the Massachusetts lost more residents than it gained. The highest of those we're losing are 35 to 44-year-olds, key members of our workforce, key members of our future, the folks we're looking for to take care of us in the next generation, to take care of older folks who are retiring and moving on. Finally, I just want to share with you one kind of example of how this has impacted next door in Newton. So, and for those of you familiar with Newton Center, know that Newton Center and Newton has had a lot of the same conversations about housing that are going on right now in Needham, including discussions about whether we should build more housing next to retail. There was a proposal in Newton a few years back to add housing above the Walgreens in Newton Center. Folks didn't like it. It was all the usual pushback that we're familiar with, concerns about traffic and congestion and what it would mean and who might live in those apartment buildings above the Walgreens and everything. One of the people who objected to it was a guy who owned a store right down the street from it, a couple doors down, at Bigelow Cleaners. He was one of the guys who admits that he opposed the Walgreens adding people apartments above their store. He said Walgreens wanted to add apartments and I didn't like it. In the beginning, I didn't like the idea of putting apartments there. I didn't like the idea of putting apartments other places. I was against it. But at the time went on, I realized I was wrong. And he realized he was wrong because essentially what happened was Walgreens went out of business because they didn't have the customers and the foot traffic it didn't do. And Bigelow Cleaners also went out of business for the exact same reason. He realized that the resistance to housing and to change and to putting more stores and businesses next to our retail businesses was harming our ability to function and harming our ability to be successful. There's a lot of reasons that we need to think about housing. One is those young adults that we just mentioned. Another is we need places for seniors to downsize. But today in our conversation, we're going to focus on the other part the workers, the people that keep our businesses that we cherish and care about, the medical workers, childcare providers, folks who take care of the older residents, people who work and run in our small businesses, teachers, firefighters, police, and the folks who work in the jobs at companies like Shark, Ninja, and TripAdvisor and NBC 10 that contribute considerably to the quality of life and to the tax rolls that allow Needham to be successful. So today's program, we're going to really focus on that last group of people, the employers, and hear from them and what they have to say. And like anything you want to do in Needham, when you want to start your day in Needham, you want to start your day at the French Press. So first, I'd like to bring in Jay Spencer from the French Press. Good morning, Jay.
Good morning, Greg. How are you?
How are you? Welcome. Jay, I wanted to start off with you so you can help us understand really what a shortage of housing has meant to your business and to other restaurants and other businesses in across Needham.
Sure. So thanks so much for having me, Greg, in the chamber. As we talk about the neighborhood housing plan and why it's important, I really want to talk about town viability. Many of you know of me as the owner and founder of French Press, but I actually want to take you back a little bit because I've been a restaurateur in Needham for 14 years. And I owned Petit Robert Bistro right across the street from French Press. And when I closed Petit Robert about 7 years ago, I received a lot of flack from people in terms of why should that happen? Why did you do that? A lot of that was driven by the changing demographics in town. This isn't a new issue. This is an issue that's been going on for a long time. We weren't able to turn the corner of using and taking repeat customers that were at a more mature age and really build down to that 20 to 30, and in some cases, even the 40-year-old demographic. We saw it coming long before it did. I had never had an intention to kind of close the bistro. I really wanted to open it and run it at the same time as I was running French Press, but the two extremes just could not exist in the Needham community. And it was a very difficult decision because it was something that I felt that the town really needed, a very premium, high-end French restaurant, but the economics couldn't support it. Now we're in a situation, obviously French Press is striving, but we depend upon foot traffic. And, you know, as I look year over year, right, we are in a recession. If people don't want to acknowledge that, I can tell you that financially, right, where we need to see more people. 50% of our business comes from Needham residents, very loyal Needham residents that continue to come every day. But that other 50% travels to us. And what we'd like to be able to do is have additional housing, additional businesses, because believe it or not, businesses do support other businesses in order to grow and support the town. We contribute a lot in terms of meals taxes, property taxes, and so forth. I feel like there's more to be able to give, but we need people in order to do that. So, you know, we're a massive supporter of the neighborhood housing plan, not only for that, but also because it will have the potential to build personal wealth. I remember being in my early 20s, being able to buy a condo, and you know it was $200,000-$300,000, whatever have you. I really push those that when this bill goes through, that you know we look to have more places where people can buy as opposed to rent in order to build their own personal financial wealth. So for those two reasons, I really, you know, I'm not quite sure we'll get to questions and answers later, but I really want to set the stage that it's important for us to be able to have that economic vitality, to have people not only come into our businesses that are residents, but also businesses, and to be able to grow more our own personal wealth at a very young age.
Thank you, James. Very much appreciate it. Next up, I want to welcome John Fogarty, who's the president of the Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital, Needham. John, thank you very much for joining us. I know you're only with us for a bit this morning, but I really think it's important that people understand what the housing shortage has meant to the medical profession in general and to how to the BID in particular.
Thanks, Greg, and thanks, Jay, for your comments and your service to the community and to our hospital. Good to see everybody this morning. Just a quick background. I think most people are familiar with the hospital. BID Needham's been a presence in the community for almost 115 years, since it started as the Glover Hospital back in 1912. We employ about 1,000 staff at the hospital. I think one of the things that is significant about us is the tremendous amount of growth that has occurred here in service over the last 15 years, people want to receive care in the community. And that's a change from years ago. Our foot traffic problem is a little different. There are days when it feels like we have too much foot traffic. So now the emergency room at Needham, which used to see 40 or 50 visits a day, it's common for us to see 80 or 100 visits a day, 5,000 or 6,000 surgeries, and 70,000 outpatient visits a year. So we have grown incredibly in the last 15 years. I can't overemphasize to everybody this morning how the workforce has changed since the pandemic. Most of our senior nurses and staff that could retire did retire during the pandemic. So 75% of our nurses today are in their 20s. And even though we've been pretty competitive on wages, and that the average wage for all employees at BID Needham is almost $90,000, which compares pretty favorably with the state, only 6% of our workforce can live in Needham. So our principal reason for being in support of a strong housing plan is that, as Jay indicated, while the pandemic has largely subsided, we are still in a major labor crisis in healthcare. Most days, we are struggling to staff our services to meet the demands, particularly since the closure of Norwood Hospital in 2020. And while housing will not be the sole solution to that, honestly, for BID Needham, and I think most healthcare providers, anything that we can do to support robust plans that meet the needs of the changing workforce would be a great help to our mission and our ability to serve the hospital. So thanks, everybody, and appreciate the opportunity to speak this morning.
Thank you, John. And John, can you just speak about what it means, not just for the hospital, but for every other medical professional, anybody trying to get a medical appointment, and how long it now takes? It seems like it takes forever to get appointments with your doctor.
Yeah, access has become a problem. I think a lot of that is a result of a multitude of factors. Again, retirements. It's an aging community, so older folks consume a lot of healthcare services. So what we're struggling with applies to physicians' offices, outpatient centers, home care agencies. These are all folks that we deal with in the healthcare continuum. And, that affects people's ability to access healthcare services. So as I said, most days it's a struggle. And we're meeting needs, but it's a real challenge.
And John, while I know that, there's a lot of focus on, finding housing for everybody, the people we're talking about are well-paid or, compensated professionals, and they're struggling to pay. It's not just that we're looking here for affordable housing. We need all kinds of housing.
Right. It's, I think everybody knows the real estate market. You spoke about it earlier, Greg. Things have changed dramatically, and it's a younger workforce, and their ability to access housing in the community is challenged. So very few people who work here as a result actually live in Needham.
Great. Thank you, John. Much appreciated. Thank you for all you do for the community. So we're going to get back to the idea of the younger population, and what we lose and their challenges finding places to live in our communities. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the senior population, because Needham has a very, significant problem looming already. By 2030, 1 in 4 Needham residents will be 65 plus. Caring for them is a big challenge, not just in terms of housing, but where we care for them and how we do so. So I have actually 2 people lined up today to talk about it. We're going to hear from Steve Stern, who's the owner of FirstLight Home Care, and then we're going to hear from Joe Frias, who's the president and CEO of North Hill. Steve, good morning. You want to come up first?
Yeah, good morning, Greg.
Great.
Thanks for having me.
Steve, can you tell us in just a sentence what FirstLight does?
Yeah, we are a non-medical home care agency that helps provide services for seniors, companion care and personal care to help them stay safe and independent in their home. So, for example, that could be helping someone with a morning routine, getting them up, getting them to the shower, to the bathroom, making a meal, getting them to a doctor's appointment or activity, sometimes a couple of hours a day or all day.
Right, thank you. And now talk about how the housing crisis impacted your ability to serve people.
Yeah, well, I say a couple of hours a day, but that's really not reality, because what has happened is, because of the shortage of people that do this work, certified nursing assistants and home health aides who are not able to live close to clients, say in Needham, they're looking at long commutes from far away, and we get requests from Needham residents and others for, just as I described, a morning routine. Can you help my mom? Often it's an adult daughter or son, which will call, who will call looking for care for their parents. Help getting ready in the morning, help in the evening for a couple of hours a day. And because of those long commutes and the shortage of people that do this work really well as certified nursing assistants, these folks are not willing to take on those short visits. They're looking for 8 hours a day of work, or 12 hours a day. And what happens is that people are going without services, because two things will happen. One is a senior or their adult child will say, well, my mom or dad doesn't need 8 hours of service for the entire day. What's somebody going to do? They just need help with a couple of things. So they'll, the service is expensive. We're private pay, long-term care insurance helps cover it. But we essentially are pricing people out of services if we can even find people who are willing to go for less than 8 hours a day. So that's on the certified nursing assistant caregiver side. We have about 200 caregivers, and I get, particularly around this time of year or a month or so back, I get the change of address, because gee, I'll be getting a W-2 in 2025. And it's just amazing how far people keep moving out from this area. And I've got caregivers that are now crossing the Rhode Island line, that are moving to Rhode Island. I can't imagine that drive up 95 to provide care.
Great, thank you, thank you. And Joe Frias, I want to bring you in to talk a little bit about how the housing crisis, the hiring talent has impacted the North Hill and other businesses like yours.
Thanks, Greg. Happy New Year, everyone. So just to back up just a little bit in terms of North Hill. North Hill is just off of Central Ave. We are a retirement community, continuing care retirement community. We house just about 550 residents and have about 450 staff across multiple levels of care. We have independent living housing, we have assisted living, and we have a skilled nursing facility with a certified visiting nurse association. We've been in existence now for 40 years. We celebrated just a couple of weeks ago. And have a strong occupancy still at this point. So in terms of our industry, Greg talked about Needham. I believe that's John talked about the industry as a whole from a healthcare perspective. But in the year 2030, the baby boomers, the youngest baby boomer will be 65, the oldest baby boomer will be 85. And that dynamic is happening across our sector in long-term care. It's happening in senior living. It's happening here in Needham. It's happening in Norfolk County. It's happening all around us. Simultaneously, we have the workforce issue that ties in with that, where we have a shrinking workforce. We have the retirements that happen. We have the impact, the residual impact of COVID. All those folks that John talked about that left our industry, they were just fatigued. And we're trying to recruit more and more people. From North Hill's perspective, only 7% of our staff right now reside in the town of Needham. 7%. Less than 10% reside in Norfolk County. And we've seen that number over the course of the last decade now dwindle and dwindle and dwindle further. To Steve's point before, we have staff residing in central New Hampshire. We have staff coming from Rhode Island. We even have a couple of staff coming from Connecticut now. And with remote work possibility, there's more and more pressure for that. And because we're labor intensive, because we're people intensive, and because we're by the bedside and by the table side, our folks just have to be here. They have to be at North Hill. Affordability is an issue for our staff. It's not just our frontliners, and I think that was talked about before. We're seeing it in our management staff, physical therapists, occupational therapists that are, for all intents and purposes, pretty well paid. These are well-paid folks. They can no longer afford, for the most part, to reside in the town. So North Hill as an entity, and I as a business leader in town, strong supporter of the neighborhood neighborhood plan this month.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Much appreciated. Great to have you here today. All right, let's switch gears a little bit and go back to talking about the younger demographic. Not that, although actually the people that Joe Heyer and Steve Heyer are a part of that, younger adults. And I don't mean young like straight out of college. We're talking about folks in that, as we mentioned in that slide, who are, in their 30s and early 40s, and their struggle to live in Needham. But Dan Goodman is the founder and CEO of Building 36. Good morning, Dan. I'm going to ask you to explain what Building 36 does in a second, but first, Needham has been the envy of so many municipalities because we were able to attract tech companies here. The work that's happened there, bringing in TripAdvisor, bringing in Shark Ninja, bringing in Big Belly Solar, as well as bringing in NBC10 have meant good jobs for people close to where they live if they can find a place to live, but also great tax benefits. Able to allow the town to build the schools and pave the roads and pay the people we do. The commercial factor there. So Dan, you're more of on the startup side, although you've been around for a while. Help us understand what Building 36 does, and then help us understand what the problem is if we can't find housing for the folks that work for Building 36 and for others.
Sure. Thanks, Greg. Good morning. First of all, not only do we work here in Needham, but I live right in Needham Center. My 3 kids go to Needham Public Schools. So this is not just business decision for me, but highly personal because I want to see this town thrive. I started my business literally above Harvey's Hardware in Needham Center. I rented a spot from him, and we make smart home technology. So sold the company to a larger entity called Alarm.com. So chances are, if you have a security system in your house, we make software and hardware products that are part of that kind of smart home system. So I hire here in Needham a lot of engineers, software engineers, hardware engineers, and I am finding it increasingly difficult to get folks that are willing to make the commute to come here, just simply because there's no options for them to live here. I mean, we kind of have our lunch table discussions, and it's kind of almost a sad joke at this point, where it's like, where folks are coming in, they're commuting 45 minutes, an hour each way to get here. And it's just like, they'd love to live in Needham. They'd love to have the experience that I have, but it's not feasible, right? There's just not enough options. Hiring a lot of engineers right out of school. I mean, these are kind of competitive rates. I mean, we have to compete with the Googles and Facebooks and folks that are paying a lot of money for engineers right now. So we're paying, I think, good salaries to these people, and it's a struggle for them to want to come here because there's just no options for them to live nearby. I've lost 2 candidates in the last 6 months alone because they just said, no, I can't come out to Needham.
Great, thank you. And in general, what does that mean for your industry in terms of being able to think about Needham as a destination for technology companies, life science companies?
I mean, it makes you question if it's viable for us to have a business here, right? And everybody says, well, oh, you can work remotely. It's like there's really a challenge of if everybody's off in their own silo, you miss that collaboration, you miss that opportunity where the sum of 1 + 1 is something bigger than 2, because you were able to communicate and collaborate, and then also just foster those relationships where that you can build something great. And for me, it's a question of, if I can't get people to work here, how do I grow? What are my options? Do I have to move myself to get out of here to be able to get a competent workforce and a place where we can all meet and thrive and innovate together?
And that exodus of workers moving to other states is something you see and feel, right?
I mean, I've had a tech lead role for a software kind of tech lead for the last 6 months. It's been open that we've had 2 candidates that we're struggling to fill these roles.
Great. Thank you very much, Dan, for being with us. All right, let's bring in next somebody everybody knows and a business everyone loves in Needham, Steve Volante from Volante Farms. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Greg.
Great. Thanks so much for being here. Help us understand, Volante Farms, by all appearances, a successful, busy place. So what's the problem? We don't need more customers for you, do we?
Yeah, so our a little background on us too. I mean, hopefully everybody in Needham knows us, or at least has heard of us, but I'm part of the 4th generation at the farm. I run it with my brother, Dave, and my sister, Terry. All 3 of us are from Needham, grew up in Needham. Our parents, raised us here. We all went through the public schools. We all moved back here afterwards. We run the business in Needham. We've all got kids. All the kids are in public schools in Needham. I don't think we got the "don't put all your eggs in one basket" memo, but it is needless to say, turning the well-being of Needham as far as the business interest and our personal interests are very significant to us as a whole. So the farm, yeah, we've been growing, and it's been successful since we've taken it over in the past 15 to 20 years from my parents. And the biggest challenge we face year in and year out, without a doubt, is the staffing end of things. And it's echoing, I hear the exact same concerns from everybody else, from Joe and from Dan. Jay, though we didn't mention it before, I've talked to him, at length about it as far as, hiring service staff. It's incredibly difficult. And it's only gotten harder over the past, 20 years that I've been involved, directly in that. Our HR manager that we have, and we're big enough to have somebody in that role, just spends more and more time each year on the recruiting end of things and not on all the other aspects of her job that she, is, would be valuable working in. So we're at the point now where it's like, how much more can we expand or, even, maintain what we have and grow if there's no supply for the staff. I was going to say the exact same thing that Dan said. I think it's about, our average now, it's got to be 45 minutes to an hour of a commute for the staff. 30 years ago, it wasn't nearly that. Granted, we were a lot smaller then, but nobody was driving that far. We had maybe one person who was driving that far because that's what he's always done. But beyond that, it's just it's a real problem, because anytime we're trying to hire somebody, it's to try to convince them that we're the place to work, but they've got to drive 45 minutes to an hour to get here. It's a tough sell. And I think it's this problem is obviously not just the Needham problem, but that's what we can control. And as people who live here, and we want to see this, this community be, do better and certainly do really well to sort of start to solve this problem along with all the other communities that are in the greater Boston area. I think that we need to do everything we can, to try to solve this problem. And having been through these discussions with all you guys, I think the neighborhood housing plan for sure does that. And I don't think it's just some sort of haphazard, let's just build as many houses as we can, zone for as much as we possibly can. I think it's measured. And I think that, myself and my siblings, I know I speak for them too, it's that we like to see that going forward, because we want to sort of be, the forefront of that, and, have it be a good place to live, and, do everything we can to sort of solve this problem that's going to help, as far as I can tell, everybody in the business community that I've talked to. I haven't heard anybody opposed to it, which is encouraging.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. And it occurs to me that the point you and several others made about how far your employees are driving here explains a lot of the traffic. We hear people all the time worried about adding more housing because it will create traffic. The traffic actually that we're experiencing a lot these days are the workers driving, everybody who goes to work driving a long distance to their job. If they were to live closer, it actually helps alleviate traffic in a way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So I think Hedy Jarras from the Sweet Tomato Pizza was going to join us. I don't think she's here yet. Somebody tell me if she is. But when she comes, we will invite her to comment. But what I wanted to do first is we're going to take questions from anybody watching who has questions. But I wanted to start with anybody who owns a business or runs a business or works at a business in Needham who would like to either add a question or a comment before we do that. So if you're a local business owner who we haven't heard from yet in our audience or work there, just raise your hand and we will call on you. Also with us this morning is Heidi Frail from the Select Board, who was involved in every step of the way in developing this plan. And Heidi, I want to bring you on for a minute. Just ask you if there's things you heard today or kind of comments you want to just kind of clarify about where we are in this before we hear from our audience.
Sure.
Good morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is fascinating. It's great to hear from all the businesses. I really appreciate it. My name is Heidi Frail. I'm the vice chair of the Needham Select Board, also was co-chair of the Home Committee, as Greg said. I just want to say that I'm speaking on this topic today as a member of the Yes for Needham committee, because I really believe in the zoning plan. And I think that it will be super helpful, not only to help ameliorate the housing crisis that Needham is experiencing, but also because it has a huge impact on our business community. And I think it's something that we really need to focus on. A vibrant community requires business. it requires interplay between residential and business. And I think that's what we're trying to foster when we put this plan together.
Great, thank you very much. So anybody in the audience have anything they want to either say, add to this conversation, ask questions, concerns about what you've heard, thoughts about how this impacts the economic development issues in Needham? We'd love to hear from you. And Heidi, I watched you last night do your thing, and you like me found it a little hard to get that first question off the ground, and then usually people spoke. So if anybody has anything they want to say, or anybody on the panel wants to add anything, just feel free to do that as well.
Could I ask a question, and I'd be interested in hearing answers from the business owners? I've done some canvassing for Yes for Needham. My name's Bill Wharton. I live on Dale Street, just across from Center Automotive. And one of the things people are afraid, I've heard people say there are going to be 3,200 new units of housing built. And I say, well, that's not going to happen because, you know, Sudbury Farms would have to disappear. Center Automotive would have to disappear. A lot of these, most of these, you know, lots included in the zone are already occupied by commercial, ongoing commercial operations. What does anybody have any thought about how much rollover there might be? What the propensity toward development would be if, you know, if the neighborhood housing plan does go through? Are there businesses? Are there commercial landowners who are going to be interested in selling to residential developers? And what I imagine that's factored into the predictions that the committee originally did. But I'd be interested in hearing that, particularly from the perspective of some of the people who have businesses in or near the zone.
Sure.
Yeah, and so it's a great question. Before, Heidi, I'm going to let you answer, and then we'll open up to the panel. But I just want to mention there's an excellent article about that in the Needham Observer today. I mean, it really talks about what would happen with this block, what would happen with that block. I strongly urge everybody to read it. It was a real eye opener and really talked about the percentage and likelihood of various parts of the town being built. But Heidi, if you could explain a little bit the thinking about what we think, you know, how we get to the numbers that we think are realistic.
Sure. So before I start, I'm just going to say that on the Yes for Needham website and on the town website, but it's a lot easier to find on the Yes for Needham website, under Learn About the Housing Plan, there are a number of items there. The RKG report is one of them that goes through district by district to show which sites may turn over. And this was done by assessing every individual parcel that is included in this plan, and assessing whether the proposed zoning changes would increase the value of the property. And if it increased by a certain amount, if it tipped over 50%, then it was increasingly likely to change. And that's where the numbers for the likely build for both the base compliance plan and the neighborhood plan came from, that assessment of each individual property. And I think that, you know, there are just a lot of challenges to redevelopment, more so than other communities like Lexington, who have found that development is going quicker, but that's because they're doing development, not redevelopment. A lot of the parcels in town are quite small. They need to be consolidated. There needs to be a good deal of financing available and so on. A lot of our parcels have been held by families for many generations, and they have no intention of letting them go. A lot of the zoning that exists currently would allow for greater production or greater development than most property owners have taken advantage of. And so the question remains kind of what is enough incentive to get land parcel owners to redevelop their property. I'll give you an example, you know, even on Chestnut Street currently, but also through Needham Center and through much of the zoned area, 4-story buildings are available for development currently, and we don't have any. Needham used to be full of 2 and 3 and 4-story buildings, and we currently don't have that kind of development, but those kinds of, what went into that calculation was how much more profit an owner could reap with regard to the potential new zoning.
Again, I'll just add to that. If you're a building owner and you have tenants in that building right now and they have leases and they're paying rent, you really you may not be thinking about changing this property for quite some time because it's already successful for you, and building is very expensive right now, and as is money and cash in general. So it's a time when you're not going to see this, unfortunately, maybe happen nearly as quickly. What I wanted to do is bring in Hedy Jarras. And Hedy, good morning. Thanks for joining us this morning from Sweet Tomatoes on Chestnut Street, which is right there in the middle of one of the areas that is part of this zoning reproposal. And Hedy, I know you missed the beginning of the conversation, but if you could just give us a little idea why, what the housing shortage has meant to Sweet Tomatoes. What does the prospect of having more customers within walking distance of your store in Needham mean?
Well, I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, the only people who live in Needham and work for me are high school students or college students. You know, it's my employees come from Framingham, continuing west. So it would be, I have a lot, you know, with my stores in Newton, my store in Needham, I have a lot of staff, about 45 employees that would love to live closer and say to me all the time, hey, do you think that I could find an apartment that is closer or that's not so expensive? And then they go and they look and they have sticker shock because of the amount of even what a room would be. Yeah, it's just, I think that there has to be, you know, some type, it's 2025, there has to be some type of process or development, you know, for people, you know, to at least for somebody to be able, for a few people to live here. Even if it was people who are renting out a room in Needham, you know, maybe they could go through, you know, go through the chamber and say, hey, this person lives on Brookline Avenue or Brookline Street, and they're looking to rent out a room instead of going through a typical Craigslist or whatever it may be, or a broker. Maybe that, I mean, I don't have the answers. It's just a thought, but, you know, with the MBTA buses, and the T, we've got, you know, a lot of people who get off of the train station right near me and walk, and, you know, who even work in the plaza here that take public transportation. And I think that it would just be great if we could, if Needham could somehow just develop, you know, some type of affordable housing.
Right.
And it's
Thank
not
you.
that easy, I know.
Yeah, thank you. Jean McKnight, I see you have your hand raised, and then I've got a couple questions I will read in the chat.
Yes, and what I want to speak about, because you are influential persons in our community, all of you, and disinformation is being spread by the No group. I got a flyer in my mailbox just 2 days ago, and what they say is there have been no studies, no professional studies of fiscal impact, no studies of school impact. There have been. I don't understand where that idea that there's no studies come from. RKG did a fiscal impact analysis, and as Heidi pointed out, they based it on this propensity for development. And the bottom line is that increased tax income to our town would be 1.5 million annually. It would not be a tax burden, this housing. And the traffic impact was studied by Greenman Peterson GPI, and with the improvements that are already planned, particularly to Highland Avenue, the traffic impact will be managed. And also, you know, the parking requirement is being lowered from 1.5 parking spaces per unit to 1 per unit, and that's supported by a parking study done for the town by Stantec, engineering consulting firm, that actually counted the spaces that are used overnight, by our apartment buildings. So I just hope that if you're talking with people, you will make sure to point out that the neighborhood housing plan was based on a lot of work by town employees, but also by professional outside consultants. Also, another point I want to make is this zoning effort actually goes back to 2009, when Needham amended its zoning to provide for mixed use buildings. The idea was, retail, restaurant on the ground floor, apartments above, and the only development we've had that has taken advantage of that is the one at 50 Dedham Ave across from the Unitarian Church. So that led us.
I'm going to stop you there. I have a question here directed, and I'm going to start with Jay on it. But thank you for your comments, Jean, and for reminding
Okay,
us
good.
that
Thanks.
there's a lot there, and again, there's a lot of information out there that will help guide your decision. But Jay, early in my slideshow, I presented this stat from the Retail Association that showed that 7 out of 10 business owners plan to either retire or sell their business in the next decade. First of all, that's got to be a challenge for anybody who is a business owner to think about who's going to actually buy it. But help us think about what is it that can make Needham attractive to that next generation of entrepreneurs, small retailers, small restaurant owner, if we don't address the housing? I mean, how are they related?
They're related heavily because it's a zoning issue, right? And what people don't understand when it comes to zoning is that, and I've ran into this challenge many times, the way things are set up is that you have to have a minimum number of seats. You have to have certain requirements, and in order to satisfy. And I don't know what is to satisfy at the end of the day, but it drives up the cost associated with running a business. So at the end of the day, if I kind of just use mine as my cafe as an example, we just gave back our liquor license, our beer and wine license, for 2 simple reasons. One, there was a town requirement to require all the people that served liquor to be trained, and it would cost us a tremendous amount of money to send every single person at the register to this. And 2, because we had to change our hours, because we're no longer open to 7 p.m. because we didn't have the traffic from 5 to 7 p.m. We weren't getting the money. So when you look at these requirements, right, there's a business impact that translates directly to your bottom line. Our goal this year is to try and keep our menu prices as flat as they can. That involves being able to not have to pay people a significantly amount more than what you would as if you were somewhere else operating. It involves us controlling our ingredients costs. It involves us controlling our overall rent. If we had an opportunity to be able to perhaps even own our own building, we'd be in a completely different cost scenario than what we are right now. So there's a huge opportunity for us, and it all starts with zoning. And what people don't realize when you talk about this and why we're so behind it, each time I went up to do something, and some people will look at the pergola outside, it took me 2 years because of zoning issues to establish that pergola. Being able to bypass these zoning issues, and believe me, I'll speak to Heidi here for a second. This committee took 3 years to take public input, to talk to zoning, to talk to planning, in order to come up with a plan that would maintain the integrity of what Needham has been going forward, but also to grow in a very meticulous and methodical way. So there's a lot of analysis behind this, and there's a lot of cost impact to whomever decides to build upon what's been created to really create some viable businesses in town.
Thank you, Jay. There's a number of questions here about affordability, and I understand the concern here. I'm going to kind of summarize one. Lori Hall writes, I totally understand the need for affordable housing for workers at businesses in Needham, but how much affordable housing would likely be built? Wouldn't that number be a tiny amount compared to what the business leaders are saying their employees need? And Heidi, maybe you could just start to explain that, and I have a couple thoughts myself too.
Sure. I think we have to be realistic. This isn't going to solve, Needham can't solve a regional housing crisis on its own, but we have to make a start, and Needham has chosen so far to go above the absolute minimum. With regard to affordable housing, our Needham Housing Authority is working on deeply affordable housing. That's a whole different category. When we talk about regular affordability, we have in Needham a standard of 12.5% inclusionary zoning, which allows for us to mandate that 1 of every 6 units built needs to be priced to be available to folks who make 80% of the area median income. In Needham, that's about $90,000 per individual. So an apartment like that would be affordable, say, to a hospital nurse, for example, as John pointed out. So there is also in this plan, in a couple of places, a couple of districts, I would say, an incentive to include more affordable housing. This is workforce housing, which is at 80% to 120% of AMI, so folks who are making even more money. It's not going to solve our affordability problem, but this is the MBTA communities bill is a supply tool. So we're trying to increase the supply. If everyone does the same, we have enough to meet demand. Demand decreases and prices drop. This is only one tool to fight the crisis. And it's not going to create a ton of affordable housing. I think that the idea is here that if we can place appropriate housing so that people who do have the right amount of money to be able to afford it can utilize that housing, it decreases that crunch. You know, Greg has talked a lot about people who are commuting for a long, long way. And while everyone's not going to be able to afford to live in Needham, it's still a really expensive place to live. Potentially their commute could be shortened. They could commute via train. They could, you know, there's a lot of opportunities. Additionally, as Greg mentioned, a lot of our housing inventory is locked up because our senior population, which is growing, is staying in their single family homes. So the movement of people into more appropriate housing is what we're really after here. And I think that will have an impact on affordability, but it's not a single bullet solution for sure.
Thank you. I guess to add on to that, the only way that we can build our way out of the housing crisis is by building more housing. And every business person has said so. It's simply we need more to add to the supply. We need housing of all price points, as we heard from people here.
And we need to start.
Say it again.
And we need to start.
Right, and that is what this is about. Anyone from the panel want to add anything before I see if there's any other questions from folks? You know, I just think that. One second. Someone says, Joe Leghorn writes, increased supply will, as Adam Smith noted, meet demand and put downward pressure on prices generally. There is no other way to do it. I mean, I guess the only other way to do it would be make Needham a really terrible place to live and no one wants to be here. But we don't want to do that. Of course, we want Needham to be a wonderful place to live. We want to have the vibrant businesses that we have. So 2 thoughts, if we have time, for Hedy and Steve. Why support the neighborhood plan, knowing that you're in an area that's rezoned? Steve from FirstLight Medical, you're in the Highland Avenue area, where in that area would be rezoned. Do you have concern about being displaced there? Hedy, you're in an area there. Some people are worried that we may lose businesses there. Do you have thoughts about that?
So let me just say, we've been in business 10 years in Needham. We were in Highland Avenue across from Panera, and we moved a year ago to Hillside Avenue, which is in the industrial zone. And we're in a quasi medical office building, which I think would probably still be here. The building's been in the family for quite a few years. We can go anywhere in Needham, and I grew up in Needham, born and raised in Needham. I'd like to stay in Needham. The key is our ability to service the residents of Needham. And as long as we're in the town and we have easy access, we can, professional staff, get out to see our clients. We have to solve our problem of our caregivers coming from a great distance and not wanting to drive a great distance to get there.
Hedy, I'm not sure if you have thoughts. I have a list I'd love to share what you want to think about this. So Taylor Stationery, Perennial Design, Harvey's Hardware, Stacy's Juice Bar, RFK Kitchen, Abode, Lizzie Ice Cream, Lola Tortola, Not Your Average Joe's, Einstein Brothers Bagels, Sweet Ruse, Peacock Feathers, Lisa's Boutique, Acorns Bakery, Friendly's, Joe's Gifts and Confections, You Do It Electronics. I could go on and on. These are all businesses that have left Needham, that were beloved by people that were part of this community. We lost them for all the different reasons that people live. Everyone on that list left for different reasons. The reality is that we do lose businesses no matter what we do, but unless we address the housing crisis to allow people to find employees that we need, to get the customers to make their bottom line viable, then we're losing a lot of other businesses. And again, I'm going to go back to that Retailers Association, say 70% of small businesses plan to sell or retire. Who is the next generation of business owner going to be? Why would someone choose Needham unless Needham is willing to be part of the solution in providing the kind of housing, the foot traffic, and the customer base that they need? Melissa Bello. Properties like Monera, Charles River Landing, Kendrick have increased various housing options and have not decreased housing prices. They've just continued to go up. Yeah, what makes the Needham housing plan likely to cause a different effect? Heidi, you have thoughts about that?
Well, I don't know that it is. I think it's an accumulated effect. Like I said, this is a regional housing crisis, and let's be honest, it's a nationwide housing crisis. There are factors that are going to come together to change this, but there is a need for some momentum. It's not something that Needham can solve by throwing up a few housing developments once. Those properties are great, and they've increased a lot of housing options. They were done under our 40B development. These newer developments that were included in the neighborhood housing plan will be slightly different, but all of it produces more housing. And that's the key, more housing. We need to create housing, not just Needham, but the entire region, until the need is satisfied. And we know that we have a long way to go. So I'm not sure that the neighborhood housing plan or any individual town's zoning will have an immediate effect on that town's affordability. What we need is for everyone to do their part. And in the short term, we have to work within our town with the tools that we have to make our residents comfortable and housing available for them, so that everyone can be in, at first place, appropriate housing for them. But then hopefully we will see regionally prices coming down. That is going to take a long time. This is not a silver bullet. This is not going to happen tomorrow. Development is not going to happen quickly. And even if it were, prices would not drop quickly. This is going to take some time.
I guess I would add that Moderna, Charles River Landing, and Kendrick aren't insignificant if you happen to be able to live there. They're your home.
Absolutely. Yeah,
you know?
I don't mean that they're
those are homes that wouldn't have existed otherwise.
Absolutely.
There is an affordable component, and that provides places for people to live. What we need to do is be able to provide places for the young adults that want to stay in Needham, the town they grew up in, or come and work at a place like with Dan Goodman's or another tech company, or work in the healthcare sector, or work in any of the other business sectors. And every time you add a home, you're helping someone with their problem, even if you haven't solved the whole big thing. Any last comments from our panel? Otherwise, actually, one more comment from Donna. Heidi mentions older people staying in their single-family homes. I know several families would like to stay in Needham, still own, but move to a smaller condo situation. Several families have moved out of Needham because there are almost no options for condo purchases, especially in walkable downtown. We need more condos as well as rentals. And Heidi, you can comment that. I think that's a market-driven decision. The MBTA community's law says the market will decide.
It is a market-driven decision. I do hope, I agree. My first home, my starter home was a condo. And to Jay's point, like that's how I got to move to Needham. So I hope so too, Donna.
Right. Any last thoughts from the panel? I really appreciate your being here today. And everyone else. And we will share this video with everyone who registered for it and continue the conversation. And a reminder that voting is now happening in Needham on this referendum. The Chamber's Board of Directors and everybody who spoke on this panel today, I believe, in agreement that they support a yes vote to keep the decision by town meeting, to keep this housing plan so we can move forward. It won't solve every problem, but it is exactly what we need at this moment. Thank you very much, everybody. Much appreciated. Have a great day.